It's time for Ask the Expert with our good friends at Ottawa Physiotherapy and Sport Clinic. If you have questions about today's subject matter, get some free advice and have some fun doing it by giving us a call, 613-789-6559, extension 2803. You can Facebook us questions, email us questions. That information's on your screen. But just ask. I mean, it's a good thing to do. I was just asking Nick some questions. Nick Ente is here this morning. How are you?
I'm feeling pretty good. How are you, Kurt?
I'm feeling better now that I spoke to you. I actually, we were talking about how I pulled a muscle from a leg cramp the other day.
Playing golf.
Exactly. So here's my situation. We'll talk about running and so on and other sports activities and shoes and getting properly fitted in a second. But I just was asking Nick about this. If you're out doing any sort of physical activity, and I went and played golf and I walked the course, make sure on days like today, and it was last week, a similar day like this, right? Make sure you hydrate with water.
Definitely, because a lot of people you're going to see on the golf course, especially on hot days, are going to tend to go towards the alcoholic beverages.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, so you want to make sure that you're actually getting some water intake, you know.
Right. Because believe it or not, I mean, it was just around a golf, 4.5 hours of walking around, but I severely cramped up in the middle of the night in my leg, one of my legs, and it turns out I've actually pulled a muscle. The cramps were that bad. Pulled a muscle in my hamstring. Yeah, yeah.
We've seen it before.
And it hurts like heck.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah, there's nothing worse. So make sure you hydrate. If you're running especially. Now, I've seen people running in this weather because they want to get their training in and so on.
Yeah, and before we get into shoes, if we talk about one of the major issues that we tend to see, especially with long races such as marathons, it's actually not dehydration like most people would think. It's actually overhydration. So it's a problem whereby people, just because if you read in the magazines, you know, you look at everything that's out there, people think that they have to drink at every water station every time they have the opportunity.
But they don't.
But you don't have to. In reality, you know, you should be taking limited amounts of water based on your weight. And,
right.
You know,
really?
Yeah,
so it's a little bit of mathematics that goes into it?
Most definitely. And if you look in the past, what used to happen at large events, you take the Boston Marathon, the Ottawa Marathon, we actually used to see deaths after the race because people would cross the finish line and actually collapse. And instead of giving people salt because of overhydration, they would basically give them more water thinking
they were already overhydrated.
And they're already, like, they're craving the salts, they're craving the electrolytes, and people would collapse.
Are there different symptoms to overhydration versus underhydration? Or dehydration?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, depending on some of the symptoms, I mean, the medical doctors, there's usually doctors right at the end of the finish line.
Of any race, there's usually paramedics and so on.
To guide you through it, but basically, there are for sure. So you might start seeing some like lack of consciousness, you know, depending on
dizziness.
The spectrum, dizziness.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely, you know, once you cross the line, they'll be pounding you with questions to make sure that they're not giving you the wrong solution in your veins to make it worse.
Yeah. Where do you find the formula, the proper mixture when it comes to hydration?
Basically, if you go as simple as Google and type in your weight and basically the distances you're doing, and you should be able to find some pretty easy answers for that.
Otherwise, if you're doing any sort of physical activity, let's say you're out with the kids at the playground and so on, make sure everybody's got some water. And
when it comes to just, you know, lounging around or going to the park with kids and stuff like that, I mean, you know, your body's pretty good at letting you know when it's thirsty, right? So don't ignore the thirst when you start to get thirsty.
Right.
Drink some water.
And if you're an adult and you're on a golf course, make sure some of that thirst is quenched by water.
Absolutely.
Not by rolling rock.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying, friends? Because it happened to me. And seriously, those cramps, okay. We're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to talk about fitting for running shoes and, you know, activities in general, but specifically running, right?
Yeah, and basically, I mean, if we look at, there's been a huge evolution in terms of footwear over the last, I'd say, good 30, 40 years. And most people still tend to believe that bigger is better, right? So if you look, there's basically, I brought 3 different types of shoes here. They're still divided into 3 categories, all right? So the first one would be your support shoe, which is what you see in most stores.
Right.
The second one would be more what's called the racing flat.
Okay.
And then the third would be what's called a minimalist footwear.
That crazy toe fitting shoe
so
thingy.
I have a few minimalists at home, but I brought the toe one just because this is what most people relate to at home is what's called a 5-finger. They did a really good job at marketing to show that that you're running it with a natural foot, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we look at, if we talk about the foot, just generally speaking, the foot, it has 26 bones, 33 joints. It's made to move in a very natural sort of motion, all right?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at any footwear, basically what we're looking for is three major criterias. You want the shoe to be as light as possible, all right? So especially when you're looking at longer distances, or if you're in a, like a, you know, high performance athlete, the lighter the shoe, the less energy output you're giving out.
Right.
So it's got to be light. It's got to be very flexible. All right?
Right.
So with those 33 joints, your foot is made to move in a very natural sort of motion.
Okay.
Right? And it also has to be very close to the ground. Okay. So if we look, you'll see my bias right away as I'm giving these tips. If we look at the typical sort of big support shoe that you see in a lot of stores, it's not very flexible at all. All right, so you have a little bit of flex through the front.
Pretty rigid.
Pretty rigid. It's got a big sort of, you know, I say close to the ground. It's got a big underlying support here, which means
big
you're
sole,
high off,
right?
So
big wedge at the back.
You can't really feel sort of what's going on underneath you.
Right.
And then on top of that, they're pretty bulky, right?
Yeah. Let me see that. They're way heavier than the shoes of today. I'll tell you what, we're going to take our first break.
Sounds good.
When we come back, we'll talk about why you like a more minimalistic approach to it.
Sounds good.
And also, what else is involved in proper running? Not only the shoe fitting, but proper form. So important to you. So you don't end up in one of these Ottawa physiotherapy and sport clinics. Although, if you have an injury, there are the 3 locations right there: Barrhaven, Westboro, and in Orleans. Nick will be back, and we'll talk more with Ottawa Physiotherapy and Sport Clinic on Ask the Expert right after this.